Hello, everybody. Today we're talking about a very important concept, one that will continue to come up over and over again throughout the rest of this course, and that is the concept of sectionalism. So, our objective question today is, what is sectionalism? This is an important concept, and we need to make sure we get a firm understanding of it now, so as we continue to see examples of it moving forward, we can identify those. So what exactly is sectionalism? The definition of sectionalism is placing the interests of your region above the nation as a whole. And this is something that's very common at this point and going to become even more prevalent as we move forward. And at this point, there's about three major U.S. regions, so regions of the United States. We've got the West, so that's, mostly the new states and stuff in what used to be the Louisiana territory they're now becoming states, and they have a couple characteristics. They're constantly getting new settlers. We have a lot of mining. There's a lot of silver and gold, not just in the center of our country, but also on the West Coast as well. And as we have these, our first industrial revolution, and we have things like telegraphs and railroads and stuff going up, the West is going to get a lot of that because we need to have, simple ways to transport goods. So that's occurring in the West. In the South, of course, the economy is wrapped around the plantations and the cash crops that were growing down there. Remember that slavery is also very prominent in the South. It's the entire, premise for the economy of the South at this point. And while the South had a variety of cash crops initially, after Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, the South is going to have all its eggs in the cotton basket. And then, of course, there's the North. These are large industrialized cities. These are cities that have a lot of immigrants coming to it because they're, more industrialized. They're on the East Coast. They're, the more established areas and stuff like that, and we also have a lot of industry and manufacturing going on there. So we've got three major regions, three very different ways of making money, and it makes sense that there would be a little bit of tension here. So remember that era of good feelings, nationalism was on the rise. After we won the War of 1812, we were all pretty pumped up and we were really, really excited to be Americans. But that didn't last very long because take the concept of nationalism. While nationalism helped us grow closer as a country, sectionalism actually divides us into sections, right? And this is basically just because of the interests and the different interests between these different areas. Each one of these regions are going to have different opinions on slavery, different opinions on tariffs, different opinions on representation within our government, on states' rights, and a variety of other issues that we'll look at in more detail as we move forward. But this is just kind of an overview of sectionalism, right, and some of the issues that we're going to see. So each one of these regions has different viewpoints on each one of these topics, so obviously there's going to be some tension and some issues there. This is looking at solely just the North and the South. We've kind of moved away from the West initially, just to show you how different these areas are. If we look at our top left chart, miles of railway tracks, we see much more railway development in the North. Top right, number of factories, many more factories in the North than in the South. Bottom left, number of soldiers. That's interesting. Way more soldiers in the North than in the South. That'll probably come into, that'll probably be an important point later. And then bottom right, population. Way more people in the North than the South. Interesting. If we're looking at the trends for each one of these areas, we're looking at the North. As I mentioned, a lot more industry, a lot more manufacturing. We've got textile factories up there. We've got factories cranking out tons and tons of goods. We have a lot more people living in cities than in rural areas in the North compared to the South or the West. They have a lot of good transportation because all that great stuff from the American system, brought from us, of course, by Henry Clay, like the Erie Canal, the National Road, all of that great stuff is going into the North. So they're really benefiting from that, and there's a lot of good transportation going on there. And they're the most self-sufficient. This makes sense. They're good at transporting things, they're cranking out a ton of stuff, and they have a huge population able to supply the stuff they need. The South, as I mentioned earlier, centered completely around the cash crops, specifically cotton. Very rural. We got a lot of farmers down in the South. They have some transportation, some waterways, that the steamship and stuff moving around on there. They have some railroads, but as we saw in that graph, they have way less in the North. And they have to import a lot of their goods. They buy a lot of stuff from England, which means that when we slap tariffs on stuff, the South is the one who ends up paying for that. The North benefits because the tariffs are protecting their goods, while the South is actually literally paying for the tariffs because they're either buying the North goods or goods from England, which are of course more expensive with the tariffs. And then we have the West, and this is the best map you can find to really wrap your mind around what the West is. It's literally the rest of the United States, and the South should probably, for our purposes, be a little farther over, but you get the gist, right? It's pretty much the left half of our entire country. This is all that Louisiana territory that we bought. This is Florida. This is a little bit of the Great Lakes, but mostly that leftoon portion. There is some farmland. We do grow some things in the West, and the transportation's underdeveloped. Well, that's because they've been, established for less time. Some of them aren't even officially states yet. So it's going to take a while for that infrastructure to get there, but once it does, they'll be quickly on their feet. Here's a great Venn diagram kind of showing you the differences between the North and the South. While sectionalism is a, 3-region issue, it's later, of course, going to become basically North versus South, which is why this Venn diagram is great to look at. So I'll give you a moment to look at that. All right, moving forward, those characteristics will come into play in future lessons. How did the American system actually contribute to sectionalism? It really helps alienate the South. The South feels really left out. They're not benefiting by a lot of what's going on with the American system. In fact, they're actually being disadvantaged by the tariffs, like I mentioned earlier. They kind of feel like the third wheel between the North and the West, because the North and the West are basically in cahoots now. The North has helped industrialize the West, and now they're besties, and the South is kind of just sitting there with their slaves feeling left out. So some issues there. As I mentioned, this will all become important as we move forward. But for now, I just want you to have a basic understanding of what sectionalism is. So when we see examples of it in the future, like tomorrow when we talk about the Missouri Compromise, we'll be able to pick up on those. All right. So sectionalism, make sure you know what that means and be able to identify it in the future. All right. That's it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.